Hello, can you hear me okay? If you type in the chat box below, let me know everything's working, we'll get started. Cool, right, let's go. This webinar is on accruals and prepayments, and is a favourite subject of mine. I'm very passionate about accruals and prepayments because I want everyone in the whole world to do them properly. There are two ways of doing accruals and prepayments. One is a balance carried down within an expense account, right, wrong in my opinion, and the other way is to use the accruals and prepayments account, which is why they're there. And that's the method I'm going to use because that's what you do in the real world. Right, I hope you brought your calculator because I'm going to put you to work. So let's get started. If you do have any questions or anything in the middle of this, just ask straight away. You know, we have to stand for attention here. Cool, right. Accruals and prepayments. Why do we use accruals and prepayments? Well, the reason why we use accruals and prepayments is to get everything into the correct period. So that means the correct expenses must be matched to the period to which they relate. So even though we're not paying them, even though we might not even have a bill at that point, we need to have those expenses within the correct accounting period. So accruals are expenses which have occurred by business during an accounting period, but at the period end, no invoice has been received or they haven't been paid. And when you do your accruals and repayments in the real world, you'll see there's certain bills that are always accruals, and likewise there's certain bills that are always prepayments. Utility bills normally work this way. So you don't know what your electricity bill will be until you receive it, but you do know you have been using electricity. Likewise with your telephone. Now bear in mind with your telephone, there's a slight complication of that because you do pay your landline up front. So you might have a prepayment for your landline, but an accrual for your call charges. Don't worry, in the AAT does not get that complicated. Do not worry. Brilliant. So in this example here, we're going to prepare accounts to the 31st of December 2009, and in January 2010 you receive a bill from Empower for electricity, and it covers the period from October to December. Clearly we're not going to put the invoice through until January. It's dated January, and if we were to bring it forward, we'd be claiming the VAT too early, which is illegal. So the invoice has still got to say dated January, but the expense relates to October to December. So we need to bring an accrual in to show that expense, even though we haven't got the invoice as yet. Prepayments are the other way around. So this is when you paid for something in advance before you've actually used it. And this will be usual sort of things. Insurance is one that's normally paid in advance. Sometimes, not sometimes, road tax is always paid in advance. If you've got a business that has vehicles, you'll also prepay your road tax. So it's anything that you pay now which you might not use all of it within the year. So some of it that you paid relates to the following year, and we don't want that expense in our accounts because you might end up with all insurance in one year and the next year you have no insurance. And obviously one of your fundamental principles of accounts is that they are comparable. So you want the correct amount of insurance in one year as it is in the other. Right, let's have a look at an example. Car insurance is a great example of this. We pay our car insurance in October 2009. And obviously we pay it, it lasts for 12 months. So we are insured from October 2009 to September 2010. That's 12 months of car insurance. And obviously we pay it in full. We don't put it on HP or anything like that. We're very good. So we pay for it in October 2009. But our year end is actually December 2009. So some of this relates to our year end, some of it doesn't. So our year ends December, we paid for it in October. So October, November, December, that car insurance, we've actually used. So we're not going to get any money back for that. But at the end of December, theoretically, we could then take our car, sell it, go to the insurance company and say, we want our money back. We haven't used 9/12 of the car insurance. So that's January to September 2010. So we need to prepay 9/12 of the bill. So with the prepayment, we're getting rid of what we don't need, whereas with accrual, we're bringing in what we do need. So if the expense was £1,200, we want rid of 9/12. So we're going to leave 3/12 in the accounts. So £300 we will leave there. So we're going to remove £900. 9/12 times 1,200. So our prepayment would be £900. So if we remove 900, we're left with 300, which is £100 a month for October, November, and December. You'll see me counting on my fingers. You might think it looks a bit daft, but in this unit here, we're not testing that you can count to 12. That should be a given. So you do not want to be losing marks to getting the number of months wrong. We're testing, do you know your double entry, and do you know when to bring something in and when to remove it. Never get the number of months wrong. Right, has anyone got any questions as yet before we go into some more complicated transactions? Right, let's look at the double entry. Within accrual, this is an expense we're missing. So we need to bring the expense in. Now an expense using dead click is a debit, and we're missing some expense, so we want to increase it. So we're going to debit the expense account. And the other side is the fact that we've come to the end of December, say, we know we've used some electricity, we know we're going to have to pay for it, there's going to be money leaving the bank account. Although we haven't got the bill, we owe some money. So we've got a liability. So we're going to credit the accruals account to show that in the future we are recognising money will be leaving our bank account, even though we've not had the invoices yet. So within accrual, we debit the expense account to increase the expense because we're missing expense, and we credit accruals to show we've got a liability. So the good point here is, unless you're told otherwise, and I have seen it once in one of the AAT mock exams, assume that everything accrues equally through the year. So a £90 electricity bill related to 3 months will be £30 per month. It is very, very, very unlikely that it will be any different. Right, so let's have a look at a question on accruals. So business starts trading in January 2009. So it pays the electricity bill in 2009 of £800, which covered the period January to October 2009. We've paid from January to October 2009. We started in January, so our year end is going to be December. So we paid all the electricity from January to October. Our year end is December. We're missing November and December. And then in February, we received a bill for £300, and this covers a period from November all the way to January 2010. So in February, we receive it. It covers November, December, January. It covers 3 months. We're missing November and December. Just always count on your fingers. So, before we get giddy and work out the accrual, we'll put an easy bit in first. You'll always get marks for just putting in bank element. So we paid electricity bill of £800. So debit electricity, £800. Then credit the bank with £800. That has physically left the bank. Now we need an accrual. So the bill is £300. We need November and December, 2 months. It is November, December, January, 3 months. So we need 2/3 of this, which is a nice round, £200. So the journal will be debit electricity, again, to show we want to increase the expense. We're missing some expense, £200. But we credit accruals with £200 because we want to show we've got a liability. We've used £200 worth of electricity. So now we've got our journals, we can enter it into the T account. First one from the bank was £800. There will be obviously a bank T account, but we're not testing that here. So we debit the bank, debit the electricity account, credit the bank. Then we can bring in our accrual. So from the accruals account, we debit the electricity account. Now you'll note I've used the accruals as the narrative there in my electricity expense account. And the reason is, so you can find the transactions. You chase them around the ledgers. So the other side of this is going to be an accruals account, which will be from electricity. So we're going to credit that with £200. The reason why I do that, say you look at your accruals account, you want to see what everything is. Don't put accruals, because it's clearly an accrual, it's in the accruals account. You want to know what it's an accrual for. So we've credited accruals with £200. We've then entered our debit into the electricity account, expense account. We'd start balancing things off and working out our charge for P&L. If I've got anything else going on here, so it's reasonably straightforward. That balances off at £1,000. So clearly the other side has to balance off at £1,000. The charge for the year, so this gets written off the P&L, is £1,000. So that's our charge that's going to appear in our profit and loss account. Now in the accruals account, on the first day of the next year, so 1st of January 2010, so before we even walked in the office, we haven't used any more electricity, so we haven't incurred any expenses, but that liability is still there. We still owe £200. So that is the balance carried down. It doesn't disappear from the accruals account. So that will be carried down into the following year. Balance that off. So the key thing is, the electricity account, that's the charge, the balancing figure is the charge for the year, that goes in the profit and loss account, and that's gone. First day of the financial year, your electricity account is empty. You haven't incurred any electricity expenses. However, the first day of the financial year, you still have that accrual. You still have that liability. If you've got any questions on that, now we've got into sort of T accounts. So balancing things off. I'll take that as no. Cool. Right. Let's move on to prepayments. Prepayments are just the other way around. The double entry is you debit prepayments because you've got an asset, and you credit the expense because you want to reduce the expense. Now, if you think about it, rent is another one that you pay or you can pay in advance. It can be in arrears, but it can be in advance. And say you took out a tenancy agreement on an office. Say you were a training provider, and it was a 3-year tenancy, and it was, let's make the numbers nice and easy, £3,000 for the 3 years, quite a cheap place. After year 1, you've obviously used 1 year's worth of rent, that's £1,000. You've paid £3,000, so at the end of year 1, £2,000 of rent still hasn't been used. So you don't recognise that £2,000 expense. You've got an asset because you could still use the rent to, if you're a training provider, get students in the classroom, charge them money, and make yourself a profit. Or you could go to your landlord and say, I want my money back, give me that £2,000. If the terms of your tenancy included that. So you could get your money back. Or if the terms of the tenancy allowed it, you could sublet it and potentially get your £2,000 back if that was market rate. So it is an asset. You can do something with it. So we recognise the prepayment as in the current assets with a debit. Now the other side is we paid for something in advance. So in our example, we paid £3,000 out. At the end of year 1, we only want to recognise £1,000. Year 2 and year 3, we've not used. We potentially might not use, might sell back or get our money back. So we credit the expense with the amount that we are prepaying. Let's look at some numbers. Right, a business starts trading in January 2009. It paid insurance in January 2009 of £500. And that covers from January to June 2009. So that's all within our year. We're fine, that's cool. In July 2009, it pays another insurance bill. This is a 12-month period, which is July 2009, which is in our year, to June 2010, not in our year. And we were December year end. So some of that doesn't relate to our year. some of it does. So it's not the whole £1,000. So we do want July, August, September, October, November, December. So we want 6 months. And we know there's 12 months in a year. So we're going to not want 12 months. Not want 6 months. So 6 of the 12 months are going to be prepaid. We don't want them. So 6/12 of £1,000 relates to next year. We want to show that expense in next year's account, not this year's. So the prepayment is going to be 6/12 of £1,000, which is obviously £500. So our prepayment, 500. So let's go to our double entry. Let's get the easy marks first. We paid £500. Debit, insurance, £500. Credit, bank, money has left the bank, £500. Now, a prepayment, we need to recognise that as at the year end, we could potentially go back to the insurance company and say, we don't want the rest of our insurance, can we have the money back? We've got an asset. So we debit prepayments with £500. We credit insurance with £500. Reduce it. So we put these into our T accounts. First thing we've got is from the bank, £500. Then we can enter the journal for our prepayment. So the first things, we always do our debits first because that's the norm. Debit insurance company from prepayments. The bank was paid £500. We then paid another £1,000. So from the bank, another £1,000. So we paid £1,500 out. We need to bring in our prepayment. Now the prepayment, we debit prepayments. It's from insurance with £500. We then credit the insurance account. That's from prepayments. Because we want to reduce our expense for the year. So we've debited prepayments to bring in the asset. We've credited the insurance account to reduce the amount. So we can now balance off our account and to work out our charge for the year. So that obviously balances off at £1,500. Putting £1,500 there as the total. The charge for P, the profit and loss account for the year, will be £1,000. And obviously that's going to be balance at 500. And the balance carried down because of the first day of the financial year, you've still got this insurance you haven't used, so you've still got that asset. So that gets carried down in the prepayments account. It's going to be £500. So our P&L charge of £1,000 is correct. That's made up of the £500 we paid initially for January to June. That's what it cost. And then it's made up of another £500, which is half of the £1,000 which we paid from July to June 2010. Is that okay? It's exactly the same, except we are removing some expense rather than bringing it in. So you've got to get the bank right. So you would have a payment of £500, and then you have another payment of £1,000. The bank's got to be right. So you don't ever adjust what was paid. The bank is always what was paid. We'd use prepayments and accruals to get that charge to the correct figure for the year. Right. Do you want to have a go at this? Here we've got an opening balance brought down on the credit side, telephone expenses. So that must be an accrual last year. Last year we debit telephone, credited accruals. When we reverse it, debit accruals, credit telephone expense. So we don't want that amount in this year because the expense belonged in last year, even though we paid for it this year. So if you want to go at calculating the P&L charge for telephone, I would suggest you work through chronologically. So you've got your open balance here anyway, so you don't have to put that in. Then just put the bank element in because you get marks for it, they're easy marks. Then start wondering about your closing accrual or prepayment. Or the accounting for an accrual at the top does give away about or what you probably should be using. So get your bank element in, and then start worrying about, is it an accrual, but how much we're going to accrue for. Now, first thing we've got to clear in our mind is, what is our year end? That's the most important thing. If you don't get that right, you will struggle at accruals and expense. So we are 30th of June, year end. So, have you got a figure for your accrual you're going to bring in? Now remember, when it says quarter, all AAT exams will either be, the charge will be for a full year or be for a quarter, but anything, sort of, never any figure other than that. So you'll find most of the numbers are divisible by 3 and 4. Well, I'll bring in the bank figure because that's the sort of easiest one. Get some easy marks for that. So we would credit the bank, debit the telephone expense account with a charge of 2654. So, but that covered expenses all up to the end of April. We're a June year end, so we paid up to April. We haven't got May, and we haven't got June. And then the bill comes in August for May, June, July. So we're missing 2, and the entirety of the bill was for 3 months. And the bill was £660. So how much do we need to bring in? That's right, £440. The bill was for 3 months. We are missing May and June, so we won't bring in 2 months. So 2/3 of 660 will be obviously £440. So we want to bring that in as an accrual. So as an accrual, which side are we going to bring it into the telephone expense account? Is it going to be a debit or a credit? Now, this is expense we're missing. So we want to increase our telephone expense charge. So by process of elimination, we put it in as a debit. So this would come from the accruals account. So we credit accruals to show we've got liability, as at the year end, with the bill coming. So we're going to debit the telephone expense account from accruals with £440. I knew you knew it. So we can then total it up and calculate our P&L charge for the year. So I'm using my calculator because I'm not brain to it my head when I'm being recorded, giving us a total figure of 30094 on that side. So that's our total. We then have an opening balance, so that's actually going to reduce the charge for the year. So of the £2,654 we paid out, £315 of that must have been for last year, but our opening accruals taking care of that. So take 315 off that, gives us P&L charge of 2779, which add 315, just make sure, gives us a 3094. Never, ever, ever assume you use your calculators right and it's going to bounce off at the same figure. It might well be the case. You've made a addition error or typing error. You will get marks for just adding them up. So just add them up. For what time it takes, well worth doing. So you see here, rather nicely, we got the correct answer. So, is that okay? Of course, we brought in the bank and then we brought in the accruals on the debit side just to increase it. Let's have a look at some prepayments then, or a prepayment. So businesses started trading in March 2004. Slightly more complicated, but it's a December year end. So it's not a 12-month period. Started in March 2004. Our year end is December 2004. It's a 9-month period. But that's irrelevant. As long as we know what the year end is, we know where we need to cut off. So in March 2004, paid £1,600, which covers March to September. And in October 2004, paid another insurance bill of £2,400. That goes from September, which is in our year, to October 2004 to September 2005. So how much of the 2,400 are we going to prepay? So when I say prepay, yes. Either way, it's the December year end we're looking at, but yes, it would be January and February that are not in. So with our December year end, we paid some in October. How much of that 2,400 do we not want to include in our account, even though we paid for it? So that October 2004 to September 2005 is a 12-month period, and we want October, we want November, we want December. Anything after December, we don't want. That's right, exactly, that's spot on. It's £1,800. So at the moment, we've got the full £2,400 in our account. But that covers 12 months, of which 9/12 of those, that bill doesn't belong in our year. So we're actually removing some expense. So £1,800 is going to be removed. So the total amount of insurance paid would be £1,600 plus 2,400, so that'll be £4,000. We can do it in one transaction here. So debit insurance is £4,000, and that would be a credit to the bank. Now the prepayment, what's going to be the debit in the prepayment and what's going to be the credit? So we've got two things. You've got one's the expense and one's the prepayment account. Which one should we debit? That's spot on. So we're going to debit prepayments because we've got an asset, because we paid that insurance in advance. And it's going to be the £1,800. And that's right, credit insurance, because we don't want that. So are you able to use these T accounts and come to a P&L charge for insurance for the year? Technically. I'm putting the bank element first because we know that one, so it's going to be debit insurance from the bank, £4,000. That's right. We don't really use T account here, but it's always good practice to use a T account. So we've got in our bank element, we're then going to bring our prepayments. So debit prepayments from insurance with £1,800. We then credit the insurance account with £1,800 from our prepayment account. We then balance that off, so that's going to balance off obviously at £4,000. That's going to balance off at £4,000. Put in our figure, which would be charge for P and L for the year, £2,200. If in something like this you know the answer, you put in your P&L figure, that's fine. Never forget these totals though. There is marks for these. Even if all the rest of your figures are wrong, adding up both sides will get you marks, and never lose them. Likewise, never forget balance carried down within the prepayments account. Beginning of the very first day of the financial year, you will still have that prepayment. You've still got insurance you're going to use in advance. So you can see here, £1,800 our prepayment, quite right, 9/12 of £2,400, bring in the bank, and then we credit the prepayments account with £1,800, and the credit insurance account with £1,800, debit prepayments with £1,800 because you've still got that asset. leaving a charge to the profit and loss of £2,200. Is there any questions on that? No. Well, the only thing we didn't go through today is an opening prepayment and an opening accrual. And obviously I want you to understand them, but basically you think, well, closing accrual in expense account goes on the debit side and opening accrual goes on the credit side, vice versa on a prepayment. The reason behind it is an opening accrual is something we accrued for last year. So the expense belongs in last year. So we're going to pay it this year, but we don't want to recognise the expense this year. So to de-recognise an expense, an opening accrual goes on the credit side. Whereas an opening prepayment is something that we paid for last year, which didn't belong in last year's account, or not all of it. It belongs in this year. So last year, we would have credited the expense account to remove it. This year, we want to bring it in to this year's account, even though we've not paid for it. So we debit the expense account with an opening prepayment. In the AAT exam, it's not like the real world. In the real world, your rent is always paid in arrears or in advance. And so when you do your accounts, you look at a schedule. Did I have a rent accrual last year? If the answer is yes, you should be looking for one this year. It can be very, very mixed up in the AAT exam. So the trick is, a question like this, it's worth lots of marks. Make sure you read the question and understand exactly what the information you've given relates to. Does it belong in the year? Does it not belong in the year? What's our year end? Do I need to get rid of anything? Do I need to bring anything in? I mean, to put it in sort of layman's terms, how I think of accrual prepayment is you look at the expense. Have we got something we shouldn't? In which case, get rid of it, use a prepayment. Have we got something we're missing? In which case, bring it in, using an accrual. That's it really. It's just getting the correct expense in the correct period. Cool. So, any questions on anything else? So, my name is Craggs. You've got my contact details there, obviously. Thank you for attending. I do like doing these webinars. Gets me proverbially out of the house. We are doing one on Saturday on variances, which is level 4, direct variances. One of my favourites, level 4. But there is actually an extra debrief on our site for an extra question. So if you go to our Moodle site, you don't follow the link there, you've got access to it. It's under webinars, under accruals, there's an extra question, have a go at that, and then there's a full debrief of that question. But I do appreciate you coming. Thank you for your attendance. But any problems, any questions, you know where I am. Cool, thank you.